What's up everybody, today we're taking a look at the updated and slightly reworked Theater of Pain on Mythic, going over important trash abilities and boss mechanics, starting off with notable trash before the first boss. Make sure to interrupt Battlefield Ritualist Unholy Fervor of some mobs so that they heal 6% of their max health anytime they deal damage. This can be dispelled. Otherwise, kick Necrotic Bolt, deals damage and applies a healing absorb. The unyielding contender enrages with Deathwise, stun Incap to keep him from casting Soothe if possible if it goes off, increases their physical damage taken and dealt. Raging Bloodhorn's Raging Tantrum deals massive AoE damage, but it counts as an enrage, so it can be interrupted with an enraged dispel like Soothe. Or for the first boss, an Affront of Challengers, it has been reworked since Shadowlands, so you now want to nuke these down at roughly the same time due to Final Will. 10% damage increase per fallen challenger, and they cast their 100 energy ability more often. Tanks, beware of Decia's Mortal Strike, 50% healing reduction for 5 seconds. Make sure to keep Satel's Necromantic Bolt interrupted. They also put out a dot on players' Withering Touch, so healers beware. Pass around targets random players with a frontal Decaying Breath, and during Noxious Spores, Passeran's 100 energy ability, each player spawns circles that detonate spawning spore puddles. Stack up to make it easier to dodge and to conserve space. Now Decia's 100 energy ability, Mighty Smash, deals big group-wide damage and slows movement speed, and Satel's 100 energy ability puts a big dot on everyone. After the first boss, you have a choice between Gorechop, Xav the Unfallen, and Kul'tharok. Now, most groups I've been in started with Gorechop first, Kul'tharok second, so following that order, notable trash before Gorechop. Disgusting Refuse leaps to random players, so stay loosely stacked so they don't jump away. Watch out for their on-death swirls. The Blighted Sludge Spewer, make sure to interrupt their Withering Discharge. Deals damage and applies Disease Dot to everyone. Also leaps to random players. The Diseased Horrors targets tanks with Decaying Strike, which applies a Disease Dot. Also cast Meat Shield, gaining a big absorb. You can stun or incap to delay cast, and the shield can be purged. Now tanks, beware of Putrid Butcher's Devour Flesh. It heals them for 300% of its damage dealt. Stun, incap, or pop a defensive. Can also kite them a bit. Don't make them heal. When you get to the first Rancid Gas Bag, you can skip it as it patrols around. Now the gas bags deals constant ticking damage to everyone and casts Vile Eruption, an accurate representation of food poisoning. It's a frontal and back cone that deals damage and disorients. They also spawn a ton of swirls and puddles. Now for Gorechop, 2 sides of the room are covered in meat hooks. When the boss sends them across the room, look for the tiny gap in the hooks. They drag you with them and inflict a bleed if you get hooked. The oozing leftover adds that spawns needs to be tanked, and they leap at random targets dealing damage where they land, so be a bit spread but stay close to boss, and you want to use root stuns etc to keep him from jumping around. They also leave a pool on the ground when they die. Now when the boss casts Tenderizing Smash, anyone outside of melee gets pulled into the boss before he starts casting his AoE, so avoid being too far away when this is about to go off. And yeah, just rinse repeat. Notable trash before Kul'tharok, starting off with a mini gauntlet full of shackled souls and swirls spawning constantly. You want to interrupt, stun, incap their bind soul. Most groups usually pull all of these in line of sight, either at the start of the gauntlet or at the end of it, and just AoE them down while crowd controlling. Mortal Guardians curses random players with shadow vulnerability, increasing their shadow damage taken by 30%. Decurse if possible, otherwise Soulstorm, dealing massive shadow damage to everyone. They also drop a really nice looking orb that lets you activate teleports. From here on out, you can go either left or right. Doesn't matter greatly which side you go, same trash but different compositions. You have Maniacal Soulbinders, make sure to interrupt their Necrotic Bolt volley and their Necrotic Bolt. The Bone Magus start at 50% health with a 50% absorb that can be purged or dispelled. So if you can, make sure to, but you also want to make sure to interrupt their bone spear. It does an unethical amount of damage to its target. Otherwise, you want to interrupt their grave spikes. And the number one mob that will kill you more times than you'll admit, the nefarious dark speaker, targets random players' location and fires off death winds. Deals a ton of damage and knocks you far back, possibly into other trash or more likely off the platform, and you die. Otherwise, interrupt their spirit frost and decurse desolation if possible. Players with this poops out purple swirls that deals damage and fears players in them. Lastly, we have these soul-forged Bone Reavers. Cast Bone Storm, don't hug it during this and avoid all the swirls. They spawn bone spikes. Moving on to Kul'tharok. Throughout the fight, several spheres rotate around the area, dealing damage to anyone hit. Keep interrupting their necrotic bolt, and tanks aim necrotic eruption away from the group. When the boss casts Draw Soul, everyone needs to group up away from boss to spawn souls that will move in towards the boss. And you just stun and nuke them down. If one reaches the boss, everyone takes near lethal damage, and players with Well of Darkness just spread out. You deal damage to anyone within the circle. Then we move on to notable trash before Xav the Unfallen. On this side, there's 3 sets of mini-bosses fighting each other. As soon as you approach these, one of them gets defeated and you fight the one left standing, each of them having their own set of abilities. You can choose which one you want to fight based on whichever mini-boss attacked last. That's the one that will survive. Moving on to the trash. The Shambling Arbalest targets tank with Jagged Quarrel. Tank Buster ish with a big bleed will also reposition and move away just to be annoying and shoot random players. First mini boss is either Nikthara or Dokig. Nikthara casts Whirlwind, dealing massive damage around it. Also targets players' location with a whirling blade, and their interrupting roar interrupts casts. Dokig slaps tanks with Savage Flurry, several big hits in a quick succession. Their Earth Crusher deals group-wide damage and spawns swirls, and they also cast Whirlwind. Then we have Harugia or Heathen. For Harugia, players targeted by Ricocheting Blade needs to move away from other players. You can line of sight to stop the cast. Bloodthirsty Charge targets furthest away player. Don't be in the circle. Heathen slaps tanks with Colossus Smash, increasing physical damage taken by 50%. And it has a frontal cone and an interrupting roar like Nikthara. Before the last mini-boss, there's a pack of conscripts, arbalists, and an ancient captain that increases their damage done by 25%, and they take 25% less damage from AoE attacks. And the captain can be controlled by DKs. Last mini-bosses, Wreck reduces tanks' dodge, parry, and block by 100% with unbalancing blows. Also buffs themselves with Swift Strike, increasing their attack speed by 50%, and their melee attacks hit 2 extra random targets, so beware. Advent Nevermore deals group-wide damage with Seismic Stomp and also casts Ricocheting Blade like Harugia. Boss time! Xav the Unfallen, whenever he spawns an oppressive banner, everyone needs to swap and nuke it down. Reduces everyone's movement speed by 15% every 3 seconds while it's active and it stacks. Otherwise, their Might of Maldraxxus gets a lot trickier to dodge, which is 3 different AoEs performed in a random order. Deafening Crash is a giant AoE circle in the middle of the arena, and it also interrupts and silences when it goes off. Massive Cleave covers half the room in a giant frontal, and Crushing Slam is a frontal line. At 100 energy, boss pulls 2 DPS down to the dueling pit for a fight to the death. Whichever player is left standing gains 10% damage for 20 seconds and Eternal Glory. The loser gets 10% damage reduction instead. I recommend just having one of those players call it quits to get back to boss fast to help kill oppressive banners and boss. And after defeating all 3 bosses, it's time to go back up where you fought the first boss. There's no more trash at this point. Moving on to the last boss. Tanks, beware of Reaping Scythe. Deals a high amount of both physical and shadow damage. During Dark Devastation, boss channels a beam and spins around. Deals a ton of damage and pushes you back. When boss casts Manifest Death, all players get a circle around him, dealing damage to anyone in it when it expires, and it spawns an ad. So you want to be as stacked as you can without overlapping each other's circles and then AoE down the ads. Make sure to interrupt their death bolt. Boss will also spawn a Grasping Rift that pulls players in towards it, stuns and deals a lot of damage if you touch the rift. This can overlap with ad spawning, so be prepared for that. Now on top of this, when boss reaches 50%, Echoes of Carnage kicks in. The Riders charges across the arena, dealing damage and knocking players away, and the combatants just deal damage around them. So the fight remains the same, except you gotta do it while keeping an eye on ghosts. If you're gonna bloodlust this fight, I recommend doing it after 50%. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or tips and tricks for the Dujuan. Want to help support my channel? Check out my Patreon, Twitch, or YouTube membership. You gain access to the stanky Discord shoutouts and videos, virtual high fives. Don't forget the usual stuff, like, comment, subscribe, ring that notification bell. Really helps me out. Thank you all for watching. I will see you in the next dungeon.